Hey everybody, and welcome back to Rinkside for another episode this week with Emma Miskew and I, Ryan Steves. Emma, what's going on this week?
Oh, I'm really excited. This week we are diving into a different sport entirely. We've talked a lot about, my past with a bit of curling and soccer and a lot of hockey. And this week we are going into the world of baseball, but with a different approach about the organization. So really excited to bring on a special guest this morning.
Yeah, I think that's the fun part of this podcast, Emma, that I've enjoyed with you, is getting a bit out of our regular wheelhouses and trying to give listeners some perspective on different sports, and then actually connecting those sports to maybe the sports that they're more familiar with and spend their most time on. And so this week, we're excited to have Brian Storseth on. Brian had a long career in politics, a federal MP from Westlock St. Paul in Alberta, but since has devoted a lot of his time to youth baseball, Little League baseball, and now is in a position with one of the larger associations in Ottawa, South Ottawa Little League, in the coach-player development side. And so I think Brian's going to give a lot of insight into, what's the lay of the land in Little League these days. Specialization, it's rampant. It's a problem in baseball, as it is for many sports. We're excited to welcome Brian Storseth to the pod here. So welcome, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to talk about some summer and spring sports, where you're smiling a little more, right?
Yeah. So let me introduce Brian a little bit. And Brian's career was as a federal MP from, Brian, you can correct me, about a 9-year career spanning, '06 to 2015, representing the beautiful communities of Westlock St. Paul outside of Edmonton in Alberta. And I think you were involved in politics earlier than that in your area in Alberta. And I think in recent years you've shifted, you've taken more of an interest in business, or you're involved in business, but that's not why you're here today. You're here today because, like so many of us with young kids, you've jumped into the youth sports arena, dedicating an immense amount of your time. And so, Brian, you've been a hockey coach, you're now a baseball coach, but you're doing more. You're involved in the South Ottawa Little League Association, and you've taken on even more of a role through the coaching development side and managing more on the executive side, in addition to coaching all these wonderful kids. So lots to talk about today. The goal here today is to dive into the world of Little League ball and youth baseball, figure out what's going on there, how things have changed. We hope to draw a lot of parallels to other youth sports, because I think we're going to find there's a lot of things we can learn from what's happening in baseball and seeing the parallels in other sports. So even if your kid isn't a baseball enthusiast, I think there's a lot to learn from Brian here today.
Thanks, Ryan. And I, as you said, I had a career outside of Little League, obviously, and things have been amazing. But my passion really, my passion has been spending time with my kids and being there for them. My kids love sports, whether it was my daughter's volleyball program where I went every day and knew nothing, and now I've got last few years I've had my son in Little League baseball, and absolutely spectacular. I jumped in right away thinking I could help coach, and down the road the association actually asked me to join in and help from an executive level a little bit more, probably because I'm not that good of a coach. But it's been a lot of fun, and it's just a passionate group of volunteers that are trying to increase baseball, make sure it's more affordable for families in our area, and yet make sure kids have fun. Then you're always kind of balancing that challenge of, like, and you see this, you guys both have seen this, the uber competitive parents where it's like, we want to go play all-star and we want to dedicate all of our winter, spring, and summer to baseball. And then that, the much larger group that's like, we want to have our kid to have something to do in the spring while school's still going on and probably not even play summer ball. And so it's trying to balance that and make sure that the priorities of the association, which are making sure that, it remains an affordable sport that kids can have an outreach for, that they can get outside, enjoy the weather, and learn the greatest pastime of all. I mean, I know you guys like hanging out inside rinks all the time, but there's nothing like a 30-degree day in Perth with the wind blowing and the sun up. It's a great way to spend time with your kids.
When you say make it more affordable, how do you go about doing that? Because different sports have a different price point, obviously. It's The equipment alone for hockey is, I think, what they said, one of the highest in terms of having to get into a sport. And how would you say you can make baseball more affordable and have these kids be able to play and get all your numbers up?
Well, it's a great question, Em, and I think it's where Little League really fits in, and we could do a whole 5 episode series on the path between like OBA, Little League, all these specialized organizations like ONC and Watson Baseball, and these things that, quite frankly, where I'm from Alberta, they don't really exist. We have minor ball, but they're all higher price points, right? Whereas Little League really does focus, they have the diamonds already, the equipment, and Ryan seen the green bins with all your bases, everything's, Little League has this all. So the focus is making sure that price point stays down. Like baseball's not a sport where, you have to have all your shin pads and all your helmets. And like, most kids have a helmet, and association can provide you bats and everything else. It's really have a glove, bring some cleats out, and if you don't have those, we'll figure out how to get you those too. Like you really have to make sure affordability is a big issue, especially when you're in certain parts of the country, right?
Yeah, so affordability, Brian, for sure. Accessibility is another interesting one that we spent a lot of time talking about because, like it or not, baseball seems to be this shoulder sport in Canada, right? I don't know if that's the right term, but it's a sport that many people dabble in. And after their more winter competitive seasons, your role now is player and coach development. You've jumped in with both feet. Not only are you coaching in the field, but you've taken on a bigger role. What do you see, or how do you see your connection with working with these athletes and coaches to always ensuring that the sport is accessible? Meaning it's not an exclusion sport where unless you dedicate 10 months of the season, meaning 6 of them in a gym while the snow's on the ground, you can't play. So how do you go about making sure this is also accessible to athletes?
Yeah, well, there's different levels of that, right? So you've got, like we talked about, the affordability leads into accessibility, but also you're right, Ryan, like the reality of it is in Ontario, you got 200,000+ kids that play hockey. You got like maybe 60,000 that play all different forms of baseball. So there's it, and the priority I often find and have always found, and for most families, is hockey, right? Like hockey has moved from being a winter sport to a winter spring sport to a winter spring summer sport. I've been with you at the 67 stuff. Like tryouts are in like April, and then there's team building stuff all the way through. So when you're looking at accessibility and making sure you retain as many athletes as you can in your program, you have to just concede, I believe in baseball, that we have to be able to accommodate for these different kids that have different priorities. And it's not just hockey, it's piano, it's soccer. There's all sorts of challenges. And if you want to keep the number one thing in any business, and that's how I always think of things, is retain what you already have. And you've got a group of kids that want to be here, you need to retain those ones. And then you got to find a way to reach out to other communities. Like we've looked at the cricket community and some of these other communities to try to bring them in as well. But you have to be a little flexible. When I wouldn't call us a shoulder sport, but certainly we are not the number one sport for a lot of families, even the families that choose to play baseball. And that's whether you're in West, Ottawa West, Nepean, or in Edmonton, right? Like the first thing I did when I took the role was, not rocket science, but I listened, right? I interviewed the coaches that we already have. What are our problems? How can we identify the key problems? Then I went and talked to other associations, not just in Canada, but I went down to the US when I was traveling and talked to a few associations down there. They run into the same issues, but in different ways. Lots of times, the further down south in the US you get, Little League competes with football, right? And football's the big sport. So then I took that feedback and I said, okay, let's build a plan out, presented that plan to our association. And that really, I have to say, the willingness to embrace change to meet their goals and targets has always been something that South Ottawa Little League has done. And the president and her team have done a great job embracing the systemic changes we're trying to make. And then you're trying to break down, like, what inevitably happens in a lot of organizations, like you try to break down the silos, right? Silos just between the teams even. You've got Johnny who's coaching his son. Well, Johnny's not really concerned about the 3 teams around. Like if you're in an all-star team, you're not really concerned about the team below you or the year below you or the year 2 years below you, right? So what we've then tried to do is create a more holistic system where you have there isn't the silos between the different teams and you focus on building up every level. And what I've really tried to sell, and I don't know if it's been successful yet, is the fact that if you want to have the best all-star team in the city or the best all-star team in the country, or you want to go to Williamsport, it actually starts with what Emma was talking about and you're talking about, the accessibility. It's really hard to have the best team in the country if you only have 14 kids trying out for a 12 kid team, essentially. You
Yeah.
need to build that whole program up right from the bottom, and you need to keep more kids in at your national and lower levels and get them up through the Canadian levels. We worked on that. We've worked on training our coaches, giving them more opportunities and access to resources to train them so that they're more equipped. Baseball's a very technical sport and not a sport that, like, you'll get a lot of dads that'll be like, I played lots of hockey, I played a little baseball, but I don't really remember anything. And the sport's changed so much from when I was a kid, right? Like, I know you've had Eric on.
Yeah.
When Eric and I played, you squashed the bug. I mean, that was back in the 80s, man. Like, the whole sport has changed since then. So trying to give the coaches and the kids more resources has been a key to it. But I think the real focus is you got to be able to keep more kids in your program and in your system, which will then capacity will lead up and bring higher levels. And honestly, other associations have different ways to do it, but like some of them are twice the size of South Ottawa as well.
Yeah, we did talk in previous episodes about balance, especially for younger athletes, and balance not even with one sport and other things in life like school, training, rehab, like making sure you take care of yourself, hitting the gym, getting your schoolwork done, all of that stuff, but also balance between other sports. So not just putting all your eggs in one basket and just playing hockey. And we've talked about how hockey is almost a whole year sport now, so it's really hard to add in others. But do you find like being able to offer that balance to the athletes coming in to play in the Little League, like saying if they are still playing another sport and trying to manage and allowing them to play both, I feel like that just would develop athletes more. Is that what you're seeing on your end?
I believe you're absolutely right with that, Emma. And I know Ryan's a big proponent of this. And I can tell you that I think that, first of all, very few kids are going to play. Ryan, you know better than I. Very few kids are going from Ottawa to the OHL to the NHL or some form of professional hockey, right? So I think it's really important. And even less kids are going to go from, Little League Ottawa to D1 baseball to professional baseball, right? So like, let's try to remove that whole scenario. And how do you create the best child that is well-rounded and ready to enter the world? I think playing multiple sports helps that. I really do. And I think multiple sports, I'm a big believer that multiple sports helps you with the sport that you're looking at. But we have, like I said, we have other challenges with baseball. Like, how do you keep that AAA hockey kid who's clearly a great athlete in your program? Well, and all too often, I find coaches and associations can be like, well, we're going to provide you that the greatest outlet possible, and 7 days a week of practice a bit. And that kid's just like, and their parents are running away because they're like, I've spent 7 days a week in the rink. I now need to have a summer where we can at least travel somewhere. And I want my kid to be able to do some of these other things and these other sports. So you do have to be flexible. But the other aspect, I think, like what I've been very successful with, and Ryan, you've seen it on my program, is we have kids that don't want to lead. Like,
Yeah.
I could go be playing national level, and these kids are like, yeah, that's where I want to be, because it's about having fun. It's about teaching a love for the game, encouraging it, development, but also that camaraderie with their friends, and developing a new cohort of friends. Like, I have kids that play AAA hockey that could do 100 other things, but they come out and play with us all summer because they like the group of kids that they play with. Baseball is a sport where, it's not as fast. You're not on the ice every 2.5, 3 minutes. You got more time to interact. You're not wearing a helmet and a mask. And like, it's a far more social sport when done right. And taking the time to do the team building stuff, I believe, is as important as anything else. And because the funny thing is, all these things we're talking about, accessibility, affordability, having fun, developing a love for the game, they actually create better teams. Because, I mean, you two have both played at the highest levels of your sport. When was the last team you played on that you won with that didn't like each other? Right? It's kind
It's
of a
hard to
key
do.
factor.
Yeah. So Emma, you always catch me with these things like specialization. It's a huge hobby horse of mine, and so I did some digging, and there was this 2024 documentary that was released by this entity called Give and Go Sport Education. I'd never heard of this entity. Its sole purpose is to promote a healthy balance between multi-sport athletes effectively, and giving parents the data, because most parents will agree that my son or daughter is better off playing multiple sports. Yet they don't do it, right? So there's a disconnect here between parents actually acknowledging that they're better off playing multiple sports. Yet the reality is it's just getting harder and harder to do that. Most sports that their kids are most involved in demand that their full attention. So it's kind of this Tiger Serena effect, right? Where Tiger's dad, Serena's dad, Venus's dad were very public in their approach to making pro athletes out of these young children. And so the experts in medical mental fields are saying it is way better off to play multiple sports. Like, the science is entirely clear. And so that leads me, Brian, to baseball. Undoubtedly, we're talking about multi-sport athletes and how they maybe are using baseball as a summer pastime, which is a great pastime, but maybe not their primary sport. But there are a lot of kids out there who make baseball their primary sport. And so the troubling trend, I think, and I heard you joke about it at the ball diamond the other day, which is, there's this doctor in this documentary, and again, it's called, it's by Give and Go Sport Education, and there's this doctor, a Dr. Litchfield from Western, that says, used to do Tommy John surgery on 30-year-old Major League ball players. This is the startling conclusion, I am now doing Tommy John surgery on 13 and 14-year-olds. That is so troubling.
In fact, Ryan, the majority of Tommy John surgeries are kids in high school today.
That's insane.
But it's because it's not a natural movement, right? It's not a natural movement, and it's not a natural movement to do, 10,000 times. I've had parents come to me in my role and say, hey, my son's got, a sore arm. Should I let him pitch next game? The coach really wants us to go win the X tournament over here. And I have a son that came up through Alberta baseball and was gifted a right arm that, could do special things. But what I said to him is that gift that your son has isn't your Little League coach's gift to use. It's his gift for him for the rest of his life. And so you need to protect that, and you need to make sure that your kids aren't being overused, because you got a kid that throws 70 at 12. That's special. But it's also really easy for that coach, where there isn't a lot of monitor, like, there's pitch counts and stuff, but it's all on your honor system, right? Like, it's really easy to be like, I'm going to squeeze an extra inning here or there. But like, if you look at what the innings of a major league reliever, some of these kids were getting up at 11 and 12, and not in our association, because like our VP of competitive is like very, very strict on this stuff, but like in other places you'll see it. And especially in the US, when I went down and talked to some of their little leagues, it's crazy the amount of innings these kids would pitch. In Canada, you only have so many months, so it is a little more restricted, and that's why they love the fresh arms up here. But in the US, man, these kids are throwing so many balls, and the repetitive sports injuries are a real thing.
Yeah.
And you really got, like, also you got to remember, like, one of my good friends, one of my business partners, his son was in Toronto, GTHL, great hockey player, got a big concussion at like 13. And dad was like, he's out. Started playing baseball. He had already played a little baseball, but like started seriously playing baseball. He's at Pepperdine right now on a D1 scholarship, living a great life, right? Like, baseball's not, I find, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like hockey, man, you're in at an early age, you're pretty committed, and it's really hard for that kid. It's really hard for my son to catch up to your son right now, because he's like 10,000 hours behind, and you're just not going to do it by the time you're 14 or 15. Whereas in baseball, it's like your grade 12 year. So it's years behind that. So the Little League kids, they're not going anywhere. There's nobody scouting a Little League kid to say, okay, you're great at 12, but let's send a scout out to look at you. Whereas even at 14, they're really not. Like, my son didn't really get started getting looked at until he was 16. Whereas in hockey, you've already been drafted to the O or your first entry draft, right? By that
a little
age.
earlier. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of parents, though, saying, my son or daughter's not at risk of Tommy John. We only play baseball 6 months a year. But I guess the difference here is anyone over the age of 40 who played Little League was probably not throwing that much in the winter. Maybe not at all. Maybe those who were really into it lived in a more climate-friendly part of Canada could get away with it. but you really weren't picking up baseballs in a gymnasium in January. So I do think this Tiger effect, this Serena effect is real. The sheer number of third-party skills development people that operate now that offer these opportunities. I've never been, Brian. You're probably familiar with it over in Gatineau. In the Ottawa area, there's a great facility from what I've heard. My son's been over there once. So there's really no excuse to have to put the ball away if you're a baseball player. It's everywhere. There's opportunities everywhere. There's someone willing to take your money for $75 an hour. So it's there.
100%.
Part of me, and then this is coming from playing an asymmetrical sport where injuries come in because there's no way to make it not asymmetrical. And that's the same with a lot of sports, but you slide, you're same in curling, your same leg is forward, and you sweep, and usually with sweeping, the same arm is down on your broom, which is holding a lot of your weight. And there's a lot of either shoulder or hip injuries that occur from curling, but there is an off season in curling over basically May until mid-August. And at the start of the year, that's when those injuries will usually come out. And then you're trying to manage them for a few months, and then they'll either get worse or you can cut it. And I'm wondering almost if that break and stopping that movement, even in a small amount, actually causes more injury than if you were to continuously, but at a smaller scale, still practice those movements. So I wonder if in baseball, it's similar because there are off seasons for a very asymmetrical sport. If even just a small amount of repetition of that movement would help minimize those injuries when the season starts. What do you think about that?
Well, for me, personally, I have a rule with my kid and the kids that are on my team, like, because it is like baseball starting to creep into it too, right? You got winter ball, spring ball, summer ball, fall ball, right? And it's so what we do is we say kind of mid-September to end of September in there, depending the weather, and I don't let my kid throw a ball. If you want to go swing a bat somewhere, but you're not throwing a ball, you're not throwing a bat, like it's just, and then in January, when we start winter ball up, you start, I think those small movements you're talking about, like it's a very slow progression. It's like the kids are all limited to 10 pitches that they can, and you're not even pitching the first week. Like you really got to try to slowly progress them back in their arm strength and their arm care back to where it is. Like, I'm co-coaching spring ball this year because we wanted to get more new coaches in, but I'm in the co-coaching. I'm looking after the pitchers because it's the biggest risk, right? And I'm pretty ruthless about the fact that you've thrown so many pitches. Like Ryan seen it the other day. You hit your 30 pitches. I don't care if you're in the middle of the at bat. Well, I'll usually let you finish the at bat, but you could have 2 outs and nobody on base. We're gonna pull you out because you have to build an arm up. Like, and so many parents that aren't experienced with baseball don't understand the building up of an arm. Like spring training goes for an inordinate amount of time for a professional athlete who really never does stop using that, like you say, Emma. But it's all about building their arm up, and baseball, you really got to be careful about it. Like you talk about curling, and I love curling, and I actually thought you guys were bringing me on the pod because I was the club champion this year, but but the thing about baseball, like there's so many guys. Emma's dad beats me at curling, and he's like twice my age. But my point is you can do curling to a certain age, right? You're not out there throwing a ball overhand when you're, usually past like your 40s, right? You might play slow pitch or throw a ball underhand, but this movement is very hard on your shoulder, your rotator cuff, like all of that. I'm not the expert in, but it's very hard on you. So it's a sport where you have to really, really be careful with arm care and some of the other injuries that come up, like all sports.
So are your tryouts then for the more competitive teams, are they at the start of a break? Like, so for pitchers, so I would say when I would play soccer, I wasn't very good, but our tryouts are at the start of the season to see if you were to make what team for the summer. And then you haven't been playing for a couple months and you come in and you're all out sprinting, trying to score to show off because you want to make the team. So after a break, I could see how it would be hard to ease back into it as a pitcher because you want to impress to make the team. So you're going to throw the ball as hard as you can. You're probably throwing more than maybe you should. Is that how it is? Because I wonder in that situation if that's also how injuries could play into that because you're trying to make a team. Like you can't just ease back into it, throw the ball a little less hard this time.
It's a great question, and it's something that we've struggled with because there is like, and you have to respect the uber competitive parents, the all-star parents that want to win districts, want to win provincials, want to go to the Little League World Series. So you're always trying to balance, how do we have this amazing high level competitive program with a house league program? And are you a competitive program, or are you a house league program that's building out a competitive program, which I believe is the right path? So what we've done is, and I get back to your question. The reason why your question's so pertinent is because all the super competitive parents want you to bring and all your all-star coaches want to bring your tryouts as early into the season as they can, so they can have their team established for as long as they can, because districts are at like middle of July. So there's not a ton of time. We really looked at it as an association, and we decided, I think we came up with a balance. Like, our tryouts are actually next week, which is about a month into the season, 3 weeks into the season. But we've offered winter skills at a very low price. And quite frankly, even for some kids that wanted to join just the last month of winter skills to get their arm built up, we made sure that there was accommodation for that. We rented a facility with throwing lanes so that kids could build their arms up. And also our VP competitive and our all-star coach was part of the transformative change we made by our major all-star coach is a non-parent coach. I know you guys had I listened to your pod on that. We brought them in to look after all the different levels so that there was no silos in there. But what he's also done is done pitching practices and teaching kids to pitch. And so we did all that at the beginning and tried to give as many kids as you can the opportunity to build their arm strength up before tryouts. Because you're absolutely right. A kid's not going to hold back when they're trying to make the all-star team, right? They're going to go as hard as they can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian, one thing that permeates now Hockey Canada's model, and I found there's a similar thing being done with Baseball Canada, is this focus on long-term athlete development. So Sport Canada has all these guidelines to help these national sports organizations, and then all the way down to youth, of how to approach season development. And so it's this buzzword called long-term athlete development. It might be called slightly different things depending on which sport, but one of the things that I think is making the biggest difference in the hockey world, so I'd like your views on baseball, is looking at a baseball season, an athlete's career, more as like a curriculum-based program, spending time with coaches to help them understand, who am I supposed to be getting this season? Where are their skills? Where should they be? And then where do I have to send them at the end of the season? Where do they have to be so that I can send them off to major baseball, major level from minor? So that, the similar things are now being downloaded and pushed upon coaches to look at it more that way. Not just run drills for the sake of running drills, not throwing together a practice at 4:30 with your assistant coaches for a 5 o'clock practice, but having checklists, having a season plan. And is that something you're doing? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here. Is this something you're doing in your role in coach player development, is to force coaches to look at this, both big, macro and micro for development?
Yeah, I have to say, I can't take all of the credit and glory for it. Kendall Giberson, who was in the role before me, did an amazing job in laying the framework for a lot of this and the evaluation processes, making sure that the website had all of the necessary tools for a coach to be able to do all the things that you were just talking about. I'm really the guy just coming in in the ninth inning, cleaning things up and making sure that we implement it with coaches, which isn't always
That's
easy,
huge.
right? But absolutely, it's something that we are now very much focused on, and getting feedback from coaches at the end of the year, and then trying to bring the coaches all together as well to make sure that they're giving feedback to each other. In hockey, I find it very useful to talk to last year's coach about where certain kids are at, so that we can make sure that they're continuing to be placed in the right spot and progress to the right place. And the other aspect is in baseball. So like we have in spring, you have Canadian and you have national, right? Well, the uber competitive parents want like 2 teams in Canadian because they just want the best baseball possible for that, right? Our view from an association has modified to be like, we want the way it used to be in like a long, long time ago, Ryan, when you and I used to play, and Emma, is everybody just played. There was no tier until you got to the big team in summer. Everybody just played. The way it is now is we've got 2 tiers, and we want to make that top tier as big as possible, because there's kids that I know that I've coached. They're just at that cusp of that level. But 2 years ago, they weren't at that level. And if you stick with them and the more kids you can keep into that catchment, the better the entire program gets, right? It's a rising tide lifts all boats, and you really
Yeah.
got to focus on that. That's a big pushback you get from some of the more elite parents, right? Like, oh, this is going to be dangerous if my kid's throwing the ball to that kid. But at the end of the day, it's not. It's about teaching. It's because the thing is, the kids don't think like this. Oftentimes, it's the parents, right? Like, I'll tell you,
Bit
the
of a
kids
theme.
usually just love hanging out with each other and being together. And there's no better way to take the kid that is at the low end of that bracket and get them up to the middle than having one of the top kids pay attention to them and work with them a little bit. That's better than any coach. I'm sure you see that in hockey too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you did it the other day. Full disclosure, both my sons have played for you, Brian. But there was a game the other night, and my son, who's not a pitcher, but Brian seems to think he is sometimes. Brian wanted to put him in the sixth and final inning, and my son's response was, "Well, what's the score? Are we up by more than four? Because you can only score 4 runs in an inning." To which Brian replied, "Yeah, I think we're up by six." And he was like, "Oh, okay, good." So now he felt comfortable going in. And the best part of it was all these really talented ball players on the team were so supportive. And so now the culture was so great. And I think that's what you're talking about here is creating this culture that's association wide that goes right down to the players. And as long as everyone knows what they're getting into, it's pretty easy to deliver on that promise.
Yeah.
And so you're doing a great job that way, Brian.
Yeah. Feeling support is only building up athletes. So building a culture where you feel supported, whether if you make a mistake, and pumped up when you do well, and having kind of consistency there is only going to build up better athletes, whether in baseball or for whatever sport they choose. So that's really great. I think that building that culture and that positivity is only good for young players.
Well, and not great point, Emma, but to me, it's not just about building better athletes. It's about building better humans.
People.
I hope my son gets out of baseball and hockey not being a D1 athlete. I hope he gets how to leadership skills, how to handle pressure, how to be a better person, right? How to handle failure. Baseball's a game of failure. You fail 7 out of 10 times, you're a great player, right? So you got to learn to accept that and handle that. And there's no better way than the kids rallying around you. Like, a pitching is such an intense position because the whole inning, the whole game revolves around whether you're throwing a strike or a ball, and nobody's out there to help you, right? So having your team support you is huge. And I actually believe, even though it's not the priority, I believe it makes better teams that will take kids and they will win more because, I coach a team that when we first started, like, I don't know if they won a game in their first year. Charlie was with us that first year, Ryan,
I
right?
understand, yeah.
Now these kids they've just progressed and gotten better and are winning most of the time. And it's not because I'm a great coach. It's because they like each other, they're responsible to each other, and they go out there and work for each other, right? And it's so cool to see that camaraderie and making the sport fun. Right? Like, that is what it is about. That's what we harp on our coaches about. If you mess everything else up, still have pizza night once a month because that's what the kids really look forward to.
True. It's true.
That's awesome.
Well, one of the things before we let you go, Brian, that I wanted to hit on was, big picture, what are the biggest challenges facing youth baseball? And the reason I ask this is because enrollment's always a big thing. I know we've touched on this, but, again, using hockey as an example, huge declines in registrations. And so it's becoming this niche, wealthy sport. And the number of registrations is really hurting program development. Volunteers are tougher to come by. Volunteers are facing backlash. These aren't paid positions. Most times these are parents who have tremendous burdens on their hands with time and money. So, what are the top three things that are really crushing enrollment or just challenges for you and associations like South Ottawa?
Well, we're very fortunate, and I want to say everything I've been able to work with South Ottawa and the team that is built has been embraced by the president and the association, and they've done such a good job for years. Managing their books, making sure they've got a strong, it always comes down to, is the association well run? If it is, that allows you to go in and make some of the changes that you're you're looking at making and address the issues you're talking about, Ryan, with enrollment. But yeah, like the situation with hockey and soccer as well, right? Like they're becoming year-round sports, and there's always something on the go. So with baseball, that's a big one. We're in a catchment that has a large ethnic community. So how do you reach out to them in a sport that isn't necessarily the big Canadian sport, and it's not necessarily the sport that they would play back home, right? One of my friends in Brampton, I mean, cricket is one of the fastest growing sports in Canada, right? So how do we so these are some of the things that you have to combat, and keeping it affordable. I mean, I think it's a strength of Little League, because some of these other groups, it's thousands and thousands of dollars to register, but keeping it affordable, making sure that you're accommodating so that the kids understand, and creating a culture in your association so that everybody understands, especially your coaches and your parents understand that the goal is about teaching kids to love a sport and be able to develop and grow in a sport, and not necessarily, well, I believe you can come out of Little League and go play D1 baseball, don't get me wrong, but it is not the focus. It can't be, because a lot of kids leave Little League after major, right? There's a drop off because the really super competitive ones then want to go do their travel ball stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so Little League's got to have a place for that.
Yeah, I chuckle, Brian, because affordability is a funny thing, because I don't know, I'm not as savvy with baseball, but I do understand that a lot of these bats cost $400, $500. And I just got the bill for summer ball, which was like $300. And so I find there's something wrong about the system when the bat costs more than the summer registration, but that's for another day.
Well, it's actually a great point, though. And I have to give credit, because it was the one thing that I was like, so I brought a plan to our president, and I said, okay, here's the plan. And she's like, I love the plan. I said, okay, but with the plan, you're going to spend a bunch of money on bats and equipment. And she's like, okay. And she's really good about it. But it's like, we can't go face Ottawa West with our all-star team or our Canadian team, and they all got the nice bats, right? And then you got, there is that right there. You talked about affordability, right? Because if the team bat isn't a $300 bat, then, but Little John, my kid, has a $300 bat. Everybody wants to use that bat, and then it becomes a thing, right? Like it is crazy. So a funny story, if you'll give me the time.
Absolutely.
The head of umpiring walked by our dugout the other day, our spring dugout, and this is not a competitive team. And he estimated there was probably $2,500 bats sitting along the fence line. Where when we grew up, right, like you grabbed whatever came out of the coach's bag, you throw on the same helmet as everybody else. Half these kids have elbow pads and sliding gloves. So you can definitely get to the next level of cost when it comes to baseball. But the key part of South Ottawa, by investing in the equipment, our kids don't have to.
Yeah.
You can choose to, and a lot of kids do, but you don't have to, and you'll still be able to go up with and have just as good a stuff as anybody else.
Yeah, let's end, Brian. Can you talk about the girls program, the development of girls ball here in Ottawa? I think there's a great story to be told here between South Ottawa and Ottawa West and West Ottawa, and how that program's developed.
Yeah, listen, it's something that I'm very proud of, South Ottawa Little League. I know Peggy Pratt's very proud of the fact that Ottawa is the leader nationally in girls baseball, nationally. And it started in 2018 with some volunteers acknowledging that the co-ed league, some of the girls just wanted to play together. And once again, like being an association that's open to change, open to positive ideas, they jumped in feet first with Ottawa West, and they have taken, a 2-team kind of league into a circuit that has over 500 girls registered in baseball in their program, and has had countless girls go on to high-level Team Canada aspects in baseball, and given an outlet for girls in the best sport there is. So I think it's a cool story. I think it's cool that Ottawa, South Ottawa Little League, and Ottawa West were a part of growing and developing that. And it's the kind of change that is only possible when you have people with open minds and are ready and willing to dig in. And we've got great volunteers here that have always been willing to step up. So it's a really cool story.
That's great. Thank you so much, Brian, for coming and talking to us about this. I think that it offers a really unique perspective on a league that is doing such great things for youth sports, both boys and girls in sports, and just trying to make all of these young athletes also great people. So
Well,
thank you for
Yeah.
coming on.
thank you
Yeah.
guys very much, and thank you guys for doing this. I have to say, 100%. My son listens to it. My mom listens to it. You guys have so many fans,
Great.
and it is so refreshing to have an outlet for people to listen to that talks about the development of their child in whatever sport they're in. They get to listen to two really cool people that have lots of experience, and I think you guys are not only got a great podcast, but I think it's a real public good that you're doing for kids and in sports too. So thank you guys.
Nice. Well, there you heard it. Emma, we are cool. Brian called us cool. Thanks, Brian. We have a blast doing this, and it evolves. It continues to evolve, and this is an example, right? Where we just had a 40-some-minute discussion on baseball, and we hope everybody can pull something different from it, and that's the goal every week. So thanks, Brian. You're the best.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Have a good day.